Hello AOS fans, Robin here, back once more to record a Meta Matters for you, and this is kind of like a Meta Matters for beginners. Hello and welcome to the game if you're just joining the Warhammer Underworlds scene. It's a game that's growing in popularity, I think, and it's going from strength to strength at the moment, which is great. Well, you might be struggling a little bit to find your way into it, maybe, and there's so many options out there these days. This is a little beginner's video, maybe, perhaps, possibly. And it's based upon a recent Glory Points article in this month's White Dwarf, in the April 2019 White Dwarf, written by the creator of the game, Dave Sanders. Just a quick shout out to our Patreon guys here because they have funded us the opportunity to subscribe to White Dwarf. So hopefully every month we will have a Glory Points related article, depending on what Glory Points is about. We will do one each month. And this month it's a very beginnery article and it's about deck building. So I did do a deck building video way back when. I think there were only 4 warbands out in those days when I first did that. So some of it's a bit out of date. So I'm going to go through this article slowly and pull out what I consider to be some of the more salient points and maybe add my own thoughts about it. I have to say I haven't played in Grand Clashes or whatever. So I don't know about making a high-tech tournament decks possibly. But nevertheless, here's my experiences of deck building. So Dave starts with a little overview of what the different decks are for, sort of deciding how you're going to build, how you're going to play your game. And I think that's important. It can be quite difficult when you first started playing. I thoroughly recommend just playing with the decks that are in the box, whichever you've got the Shadespire box or the Nightvault box, and that will give you an understanding of the mechanics of the game. And then as you get more cards, you'll realise there are slightly different play styles. 2 main play styles are probably aggressive and objective grabbing. So aggressive, you're trying to kill your opponent as fast as possible, and objective grabbing, you're trying to use the hexagonal objectives that are on the board, trying to use those to your ability, and there are various objective cards which will score you points for standing on one or more of those. So the first thing to do really then is decide what sort of player you are. Are you an aggressive player, or do you like a bit more strategy? That's a bit harsh. Moving about, toing and throwing, controlling the board, manipulating your opponent into the positions you want them to be in, or just getting your models into the positions you want them to be in. So that's just 2 of the possible play styles. But you kind of need to decide how you want to play, and then you're going to build your decks in that way. There's no point in having objective cards in your deck for killing lots of things if you're not planning to do that. So for an example, I played as the extreme end of it. I played a Goblin Scurry deck a while ago, and that had almost all movement ploys, nothing offensive in it at all. And the idea was to try and avoid combat and keep my men moving around. It was a quite extreme example. You would normally go somewhere between the two, because I think you always need some defensive capability and offensive capability just to keep your opponent at bay. Anyway, so Dave rightly says that you should start with your objective deck, because that's the kind of core of your game, really. That's going to dictate how you play. So your power deck is going to be based upon your objective deck, because everything in your power deck is for your gambits and your upgrades is going to be focused on achieving your objectives. So you want to pick your objective deck first and then tailor your power deck to meet that objective deck. And Dave has a few ideas on what you should do. He says you should include 3 or more score immediately cards. Score immediately cards are great, so they enable you to get glory in game, not just in the end phase. So while you're in the action phase where you're activating your models, glory here is brilliant. Score immediately glory is brilliant. It actually has 2-fold purpose. One is that it immediately gives you glory, which is great, as you can spend that to make your fighters better and therefore improve your chances of success of your overall plan. But it also means you're cycling through that objective deck, because you don't want to get to the end of the game and have 3 cards unturned, really, because that's glory points that have gone begging. So you want to get through them. He says 3 or more. I would definitely try and go with more. I'm not sure if there's a maximum number at all. I mean, there are more and more of these cards. They don't score that highly, so you probably don't want 12 of them. But I could definitely see a case for 6, maybe even 8. Because you can just cycle through and score that glory. I think it's easier to score immediately cards if you're offensive. There seem to be more offensive tailored ones than objective or defensive. So those are the score immediately cards. So I agree with Dave there. Pick no more than 2 third end phase cards. Again, I would agree with that. Definitely agree with that. I would probably say you probably only really want 1. There's so many good other cards out there that there aren't really very many third end phase cards that you might want. I know some people run Denial or Conquest, which are third end phase cards. I pretty much always run Superior Tactician, which is the one if you've scored 6 other objectives in the game, then you will score Superior Tactician at the end. It can be, don't always score it, but I mostly score it. And of course, if you do that, you want as many score immediately cards in your deck as you possibly can, so you can cycle through. In fact, there are so many score immediately cards in your deck now that even if you pick up Superior Tactician at the very first turn and have to carry it all the way through to the end, you can probably cycle through with the score immediatelies to still score Superior Tactician, which at one point would have been impossible. Interestingly, there's a few cards here he picks, some examples. So I've noticed that he's got the third end phase card he's chosen. He's scored this in the third end phase of the no surviving enemy fighters and no friendly fighters out of action. I mean, it's a brilliantly high glory scoring card, 6 glory, but I would probably count that as one of the worst cards in the game. Almost impossible to score. You've got to lose no fighters at all and kill everybody else. That's such a difficult thing to do. I think there's an equivalent one where you have one person left and all your opponent dead. But that's really tough to score as well. So I definitely wouldn't have that in my deck. And then what other options does he offer? Include 4 or more easy glory cards. Now, what's an easy glory card? That's a good question. I think things like escalation, because you can score that, and that's great because if you're not doing very well but your opponent is, then they give you glory. Okay, they're ahead of you, but they give you 2 glory, and that gives you 2 glory to spend, which then might help you further your plans. That's why I like escalation. There's have been calls to have it banned, but I don't think that they will, because it gives some good game balance, I think, even though it's a ubiquitous card. You'll see it in every competitive text. Speaking of which, this article doesn't mention the banned cards, and I think that's probably because they're not wanting to make this game, although it's the ultimate competitive game, they don't want to make it like everybody has to play. That way you can include the banned cards if you want to. An Extreme Flank would be an example of an easy glory card, although again, if you do ever intend on playing in a store or competitively, then you probably don't want to get used to playing Extreme Flank, because ultimately it is banned and you won't be able to use it. Other easy glory cards, I think Ploy Master is reasonably easy to score. Master of War is another one, and there's some things like, there's a score immediately card, Change of Tactics is classically very easy. And you have to put somebody on guard and in charge of them, and if you're playing a warband where it actually has a card that you can put somebody on guard, that is brilliant. And that tailors also really nicely with Keep Them Guessing, which is a comparatively easy card to score and doesn't depend, and you can score that almost independently of what your opponent is doing. And those 2 cards tailor quite nicely because you've got a double effect of putting somebody on guard, which can sometimes feel like a wasted activation. So there's some examples of 4 easy glory cards. It's not always to tell what easy glory cards are at the beginning when you're first starting out, but you will find your play style enables you to feel how you like to play and which cards you're likely to score. Fired Up is the one that's given an example here. If you've got an inspired fighter, you're generally always trying to inspire some fighters, so Fired Up is quite an easy card to score. And another example would be Night Haunts from the starter set. I've got a card which enables them to, if they make a reaction, they can score a glory. And again, that's another really easy card to score if you are just starting out and you're starting out with the Night Haunts. And the Stormsire has an equivalent card. I think it's Harness the Storm. Basically, if you cast a spell, I think it is Harness the Storm, you score that. And it's relatively easy to cast spells with Stormsire's Curse Breakers, so that's a good card to have for them. And it is worth bearing in mind, again, as I was talking about the ban list, some of them are restricted, so some of the easy scoring cards are restricted. What Dave says is that the power deck is a means to an end, and I'm not going to lie, this section is a little bit like teaching Grandma to suck eggs. I don't think there's anything in here that will rock your world. It basically says your upgrades and your gambits should help you achieve your objectives. Supposing you've got a supremacy in your objective deck, then you want cards that are going to help you move if you get knocked off, or give extra movements to get on those objectives, or maybe pull the objectives towards you. You don't want too many +1 to hit cards, because you're not trying to do that. More interesting, he does say don't rely on upgrades for a single fighter. I think this is quite a key thing, and it's not obvious when you first start playing the game. Many of the upgrades and some of the slightly better ones are tempered in their goodness, if you like, because they are only for specific fighters. So you might get a nice, like the Orcs card have one where you can basically attack everybody who's adjacent to you, but it is only for Bonecutter. But you have to bear in mind that the Bonecutter is dead, or whatever, whoever it may be. If they're dead, then it's no use whatsoever, because you can't put it on anybody else. It's a wasted card slot. Alternatively, it may just be that that person happens to not be in a particularly useful position and you don't actually want to use it on them at the beginning, or it comes out towards the beginning and you don't want to use it on them yet, and you then have to throw it away. That doesn't happen quite so often, but tend to shy away from the cards that are specifically for individuals, just because they're not very, you can't utilise them in a lot of situations, especially in in best of twos or in best of threes where the person knows you've got that card, so they may try and kill you as soon as possible. The exception to this rule is probably if you're playing Moloch, you're probably only going to want to spend glory on putting things on Moloch anyway, and Moloch's very, very hard to kill. So I think probably having Moloch only objectives is probably totally fine should you play Moloch's mob. And this touches on Dave's final point, really, is that you want your cards to have multiple applications if you can. What does that mean? In terms of the upgrades, I think being able to play them on multiple people is really good. But in terms of the gambits, Inspiration Strikes, for example, this card is great if you've got Fired Up in your deck because it enables you to score Fired Up, almost guarantee it. Score Fired Up. Recall Vision is another one which does something similar. It's really good for the Chosen Axes because they have to be on objectives to inspire, and you can actually get them on an objective early and inspire them. So that they have multiple applications with that, and then they help you score Fired Up. So there's also Shining Example is another card where these can marry up quite well. But not only that, obviously inspiring your characters, and certainly in case of the Chosen Axes, they're much better when inspired, a lot of them. So they're really useful things to be able to do to get them inspired. It has a twofold purpose. Similarly, Sidestep and Distraction, which Dave talks about in the article. Sidestep is great for getting yourself onto objectives, but it's also great for bringing yourself in closer to attack or moving yourself away from an attack, or maybe even if you've got something really clever and you're going for ganging up, then you can use it to swamp your opponents. So they have great uses, and Dave talks about Irresistible Prize, which I think is quite an underrated card because it enables you to move your people and your opponent's people towards objectives. And if you've got some cunningly placed objectives near some lethal hexes, you can actually do a fair amount of damage with that way, and really do your opponent over, which is great. Also a great card that's multi-use, multi-purpose, or is a double-edged sword, and that Shard Gale can get you towards all sorts of things, really, but it does bring everybody down to a level. But it's useful for things, cards like the one where you score glory if lots of people are injured. One thing to consider when building your power deck is, of course, the number of cards you can have in it. Obviously, the objective deck has to be 12 cards, no more, no less. The power cards, and some people get confused by this, it has to be, you must have at least 50% of your power cards and must be upgrades. So you can have more upgrades than gambits, but you cannot have more gambits than upgrades. And I've seen a few times on Facebook people have got that wrong, which is fine because we're all learning. You must have the same amount or more upgrades than gambits. You cannot have more gambits than upgrades. Gambits, to be clear, are ploys and spells now. If you play a game with spells, it's just ploys, but if you are playing the spells, count with your ploys to your gambits, which you must have no more than half, no more than the same amount as you do upgrades. That was a very long way of explaining something that was quite simple. So how many cards should you have? Well, I've seen lots and lots of people who've come over from a hardcore card games like Magic the Gathering, the competitive games. Absolutely, you should have 20 cards because they're the best 20 cards, and if you have 21 or 22, then that's effectively saying cards 21 and cards 22. They're not as good as cards 20 downwards. So why do you want them to come out ahead of those? So take them out because you must have at least 10 upgrades and therefore 10 other things. But people do run more, Grand Clash winners run more. So why is that? Well, it's partly because you've got some cards which enable you to cycle through the deck really quickly. One of our Patreon supporters, Andrew, loves the cards that enable you to get through your cards faster. So therefore it's okay to have more because you're going to get through them all anyway. That's he has Improvisation and Duel of Wits in his decks, and Pete's tried that out to reasonably good effect, so perhaps Andrew's onto something there. Another reason I think is that although yes, there are cards that are better, some better than others, Ready for Action, as I've already said, is one of the best cards in the game. You definitely want that in there. The way this game works, and perhaps it's the same in card games and I just can't see it because I haven't played them, is that sometimes you're playing an opponent who plays in a very different playstyle, or a warband that plays with a very different playstyle. So, okay, maybe Spectral Wings is a card that you sort of want in your deck, and it's card 11, it's Gambit 11 out of 10 that you want to include in your deck, and you decide that actually it is good to have in there, because although, yes, okay, it might not be as good against some decks if you're playing somebody and you're trying to attack them and they're right in your face, you probably don't need it, and therefore it's a wasted card. Perhaps your opponent sits right back and you have to get to them, in which case you have to have Spectral Wings to get them if you've got a slow-moving warband. And okay, it may not always be optimum, but there are times when not having it in your deck is very, very suboptimal. So if it's not in your deck, there's no chance it can come out. If it is in your deck, okay, you've slightly reduced the chances overall. I think it's only about 2% for each additional pair of cards for over 20. reduce the chance of a card coming out. If it's not in there, it can't come out at all. So I think that's why I think this game has quite different, because you have different play styles, people meeting each other. I think it's quite good to have that flexibility. I could be wrong. I'm not a competitive player, so that's just my gut feel. So I tend to run with 22, and that's partly because I don't play competitively, and sometimes the pain of getting down to 20 is just too much for me. Another example might be if you want keys in your deck. The more keys you've got, the more chance you have of getting the keys out to score some glory. But there are times when you might want to go more than 20. I don't normally go more than 22, because it is true. And when I have played 24, I have struggled to get out the cards that I needed when I needed them. So it does make a difference. I'm not sure you need to be absolutely religious about getting down to 20, but I know there are people who are. So I apologise again, I've rambled on, but to explain something fairly simple in a long way, which is pretty much the Agents of Sigmar style. I've kind of really just reiterated what Dave said. He wrote the game, he knows what he's talking about. I'm not entirely sure I have much more to add, except to say, if you just join the game, play the game out of the box, get a feel for which of the 2 warbands in the box you like and how you might like to play them, and then build your collection up from there. Don't feel pressured to go out and rush out and buy everything. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of cards, and I actually think it will confuse you. I know I had a learning curve, I think, between going from 4 to 6 warbands and all those extra cards. Suddenly, I really struggled to get a grip on how I was playing. It took me a while to readjust, and I don't go out and buy everything because you will just get thrown in a mess. I think you can, if you're playing with friends, you can look on Underworld's DB and maybe proxy some cards, see which ones you like. I have a feeling, and I have no basis in fact to say this whatsoever, but I have a feeling the older cards are gradually going to become redundant. So maybe you want to look forward. Okay, you're not going to play any tournaments immediately, because if you are, you need cards like Ready for Action, which is absolutely the best card in the game. But if you're looking forward, I think you're only going to want to buy new boxes. So don't feel like you've got to go out back and buy everything, unless you've got, obviously, if you like those warbands, then go ahead and do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I am saying you shouldn't, but I'm not saying don't do it under any circumstances, but I just feel if you've just joined the game, you're looking at shelling out an awful lot of money. If you want to be competitive immediately, yes, you've got to go and shell out that money now. If not, just follow the game, see where it evolves. We've got 2 new warbands coming in very soon. They've talked about Dreadfame, which is we're going to include another 2 warbands in the not too distant future. That's going to massively increase your card loadout that you can use. I definitely would think about getting the Echoes of Glory pack, because that's just 2 sets of cards, and that's really good if you're not going to play the Garrick's Reavers or Severin Steelheart. You may like those. I'm not sure. Reavers thematically I think are great. Severin I think it's quite boring warbands, so I wouldn't necessarily get those. And I'd be looking forward to the new packs and seeing where the game's going to go rather than where it has already been. But that, you may disagree. If you disagree with that, people who are experiencing the game, then do put that in a comment below. Most of all, newcomers, do have fun with the game. If you've got any questions, do chuck a message on here. Pete and I will always try and answer them. Or you can find us at Agents of Sigmar on Facebook. We'll always answer questions over there as well. Like I say, we will be doing regular Glory Points coverage. I'm not sure this was necessarily the best one to start with. We haven't bought White Dwarf for quite some time. I thought we'd try it because we knew this column was in here. This is, as I say, this is a little bit kind of basic, and there isn't much I can add because Dave has covered it all. Maybe he always does that, in which case it'll just be me agreeing with Dave every month, which is just fine, because I'm happy to agree with the guy who designed this excellent game that Pete and I love so much. So until next time, we hope you're all faring well. Enjoy your time in the Mirrored City. Do try and stay ready for action, and we will see you soon. Bye.